feel like it has been a while since we have done a solid American cemetery tour. I used to do these all the time on this channel, and well, just haven't had a chance lately to get to any cemeteries in the United States. Well, anyway, right now I am traveling through St. Louis, and I've been here before. As a matter of fact, I've been to a cemetery close by to the one where I am now, early on in the channel, called Calvary Cemetery. It's where William Tecumseh Sherman is buried, Dred Scott, Tennessee Williams. So I'll put a link in the description where you can go check that out if you haven't seen it already. But anyway, I didn't get a chance to visit one close by where I am right now. This is Bellefontaine Cemetery, and as far as historical graves, this one is pack loaded. Anytime that I visit one of these cemeteries, the Latin phrase memento mori is something that always comes to mind to me. This is a phrase that the early Christians and Stoics would reflect on. And in English, it roughly translates to remember death, or remember that you have to die. And it's something that, like I said, the early Christians would reflect on to think about their own mortality and how to spend their time on earth wisely and invest in eternal things. Well, cemeteries are a good place to reflect on death and the finite nature of life. And it's also a good place to learn about history. And as I mentioned, we're here in Bellefontaine Cemetery. This is a place that was, or a cemetery that was established in the mid-1800s. And we're going to start off our tour of the cemetery at probably the most visited grave here. Right here on the highest point in the cemetery is the grave of a man who, if you went to school in the United States, well, in grade school, you no doubt heard his name. This is the grave of William Clark, whose name is most associated with the Lewis and Clark expedition. So anyway, William Clark, just in short, you know, these videos are not designed to be like full-on biographies or anything, just kind of giving you a little taste of the history here, and you can go and look up more on your own. But William Clark was born in 1770. At the age of 19, joined the military, fought at the Battle of Fallen Timbers, which was in the Northwest Indian Wars in Ohio, is where the Battle of Fallen Timbers was anyway. And in 1803, Meriwether Lewis recruited him to be a part of the Corps of Discovery. The United States, under Thomas Jefferson, had just made the Louisiana Purchase and had this massive expanse of ground. And Jefferson wanted to send this team of explorers up the Missouri River to see if there was a passage to the Pacific Ocean. So they, go on this massive journey along the Missouri River and across the Rocky Mountains, and ended up making it to Oregon and the Pacific Ocean. The expedition goes from 1804 to 1806. And William Clark, his name becomes etched in American history as one of our most famous explorers. Now, he does have kind of a complicated legacy. He wasn't a perfect man. He was known to be quite cruel with his slaves, and later became a territorial governor. But yeah, right here is the grave of William Clark. Okay, now we have to use our imaginations on this one a little bit, so just bear with me here. If you look, here is the grave of Henry Massie. here is the grave of Fanny Massie. And then we have this headstone that has been weathered to the point where you can't even read it anymore. Well, buried somewhere here is a guy by the name of William Massie. Now, you have probably never heard of William Massie. He was a steamboat pilot from Missouri, and he was playing poker with Wild Bill Hickok on the day that Wild Bill was shot and killed. And here's the wild part of this story. It's said that the bullet passed through Wild Bill's head and lodged in Captain Massie's left arm, and it's thought that he carried the bullet that killed Wild Bill Hickok with him until the day he died. So somewhere here is the grave of Massie and possibly the bullet that killed Wild Bill Hickok. Now here is a grave that I was really wanting to make a point to visit while I was here at Bellefontaine today. This is the grave of John Barry Mechum, who lived from 1789 to 1854. And as you can see there, it says African founder and pastor, 1817 to 1854 of the First Baptist Church west of the Mississippi River. That's pretty cool. I'm a Baptist guy myself, so I can appreciate that. And then if we go over here, well, we also see that his wife Mary is also memorialized here. Now, here's something that's really cool about John and Mary. So John Mechum originally started off in Kentucky and was a conductor on the Underground Railroad. So he helped a lot of, like upwards of 75 enslaved people, at least that's what I read, get from Kentucky to Indiana, which was a free state. And then once he got here to St. Louis, well, he and his wife, helped people across the Mississippi River to Illinois, which of course was a free state. Missouri was a slave state at the time. Here's something that just really fascinates me. They had a school that was set up in their church basement, and well, Missouri had a law at the time that said that the African Americans could not be educated. So there was a law banning black people from being educated in Missouri. So they set up the Floating Freedom School on a steamboat in the Mississippi River. So river, that was federal property. So they were taking people out into the middle of the river during the day and getting them an education. And I just absolutely love that, and I think that you should look these people up and learn more about them. Now, also buried here is Reverend John Anderson. You can see he lived from 1818 to 1863, and he kind of picked up the mantle from John Mechum after he died and became pastor here in St. Louis. He worked in the printing press of Elijah P. Lovejoy, who was an abolitionist who was killed, and was also a spiritual advisor for Dred Scott and his wife. Yeah, very fascinating. Look up some more on these people. Their story is really something else. I'm kind of wandering around here in this cemetery looking for a few more of these historic graves. And as we are walking through here, I can't help but just mention how much I admire the artistry in some of these headstones. I'm kind of biased towards old things anyway, so I don't know. It just looks really interesting to me. Kind of like this headstone right here, which is just kind of a giant stump. I'm a big outdoorsman myself, so the idea of having a stump as a headstone is kind of appealing to me. But anyway, got a few more that, well, not a few more, we actually have quite a few more graves that we're going to be looking for here. All right, let's take a look at a Civil War grave here in Bellefontaine. This right here is the grave of General Don Carlos Buell. So Buell was originally out in California at the beginning of the Civil War and ended up coming back and was with McClellan at the Army of the Potomac for a little bit, and then got transferred out to the Midwest and became the commander of the Army of the Ohio. So he reinforced Grant during the Battle of Shiloh and kind of claimed that he was the victor of the Battle of Shiloh. And then he was also at the Battle of Perryville. Buell kind of had a reputation for being a little bit slow-moving. Even McClellan kind of criticized his slow movement, and if McClellan is criticizing you for being slow, man, that is like molasses level slowness right there. But anyway, Don Carlos Buell, after Perryville, ended up kind of fading into obscurity, I guess you could say, as far as Civil War generals go. He didn't really have anything significant after that, and was kind of faced with a bit of a demotion, and rather than take that, he just kind of, well, resigned. But anyway, here is the grave of General Don Carlos Buell and his wife. Real quick, while we are here at the grave of Don Carlos Buell, I wanted to show this grave right here because, man, this thing is stunning. This is the grave of General Richard Barnes Mason, who it says was colonel of the 1st Regiment of Dragoons, U.S. Army. Let's see, born 1797, died at Jefferson Barracks in 1850. But I just really like the artwork and the sculpture here on his tomb. And yeah, thought it was worth just an extra look. We've moved just up the hill from Don Carlos Buell, and here we have the grave of another Civil War figure. This is the grave of Sterling Price. Now, Sterling Price, as you can see right here on this bronze plaque, had also served as the governor of the state of Missouri from 1853 to 1857. This was a slave state at that time. And when the Civil War broke out, well, he found himself on the Confederate side. Sterling Price was in one of the early battles of the Civil War, the Battle of Wilson's Creek, which is a battle that's on my list of places to cover here in the near future. I need to get down to Wilson's Creek. That battle also saw the very first Union general killed in the war, Nathaniel Lyon. Price was also at the Battle of Jenkins Ferry down in Arkansas. That's another battle that we have covered here on the channel. He ended up going across the Mississippi River to try and give assistance after Beauregard lost at the Battle of Shiloh, but ended up back over on the Trans-Mississippi Theater, or in the Trans-Mississippi Theater, and in the fall of 1864 was wanting to do like a full-scale invasion of the state of Missouri, and ended up kind of just doing like a really big cavalry raid instead. And he ended up doing kind of like this large tour of the state of Missouri. Fought at Pilot Knob and won there. Let's see, Lexington. There were a few other battles where he was victorious. And then he ended up getting out to Westport, which is around present-day Kansas City, and suffered a pretty terrible defeat there. As a matter of fact, I've heard Westport sometimes referred to as the Gettysburg of the West. And after that, there wasn't too much more that we heard from old Sterling Price. But here's his grave. Here's a grave that I wanted to just make quick mention of. This is the grave of Susan Blow. You can see that she lived from 1848 to 1916, and she is considered to be the mother of the American kindergarten. So she established the first kindergarten in the United States, and in the first year, I forget how many students she had, but I know that she like financed the entire thing herself to keep it open. So anyway, for all of you Americans who went to kindergarten at some point, or have kids who went to kindergarten, well, you can thank Susan Blow for that. All right, let's take a look at another Civil War grave here of a general who you may be familiar with. This is the grave of John Pope. Now, John Pope was a graduate of the U.S. Military Academy in 1842. He was in the Mexican-American War, and prior to the Civil War, he spent a lot of his time surveying different southern routes to a possible transcontinental railroad. Well, when the Civil War broke out, he initially served under John Fremont and had some success under Sterling Price, whose grave we just saw a little bit ago, at Island Number 10 on the Mississippi River. It's down around the boot heel of Missouri, and did well there to the point where Lincoln brought him to the Eastern Theater to lead the newly formed Army of Virginia. Well, he comes to the East and he's kind of bragging about all of his success in the West, and long story short, gets his butt handed to him at the Second Battle of Bull Run, or Second Manassas. He was kind of concentrating on Stonewall Jackson, and then Longstreet hit him in the flank and routed his army. But anyway, here is the grave of John Pope. If you are from Shreveport, Louisiana, well, you might take an interest in this grave right here. This is the grave of Henry Miller Shreve, for whom the city of Shreveport is named after. Now, this headstone, or this monument, is really weathered and it's pretty difficult to read. But anyway, he was born in 1785 and lived until 1851, and was really known for his work in the steamboat industry. So he made some improvements to the steamboat, and also, you know, early on in river travel, there was huge problems with log jams and with shallow waters and things like that. Well, he developed something called a snag boat to basically clear rivers of log jams. So he ended up really doing a lot to help with river traffic, and his grave is right here. If you are a big-time businessman and philanthropist, well, there's a decent chance that after you die, you get to have your final resting place in a big old tomb like this one right here. This is the final resting place of Adolphus Busch. You might recognize his name from the Ard and Heiser Busch brand. He was one of the co-founders. Busch was German-born and was an immigrant to the United States. He was the 21st of 22 kids. Like, that is wild to think about, somebody cranking out 22 kids. But anyway, in 1857, I think, when he was 18 years old, he immigrated to the United States with 3 of his older brothers, settled in the St. Louis area, as did many German immigrants. And, well, because there were a lot of German immigrants here, there was a demand for beer. He ended up serving in the Civil War with the Union Army. He was with the 3rd Missouri U.S. Reserve Corps, if I remember correctly. And anyway, after the war, he ended up partnering with his father-in-law, a guy by the name of Ard and Heiser. And then after Ard and Heiser died, he became the president of the company. To kind of build up Budweiser as a national brand, he created this network of rail-sided ice houses to keep the beer cold, and also came up with like these refrigerated cars, or utilized them. I think he had the first fleet of refrigerated freight cars. So did a lot to build the brand after his father-in-law died. Yeah, right here inside of this impressive structure is the tomb of Adolphus Busch. Okay, now I mentioned that Adolphus Busch was the son-in-law of the other name in Anheuser-Busch, Ard and Heiser. Well, right back here is the grave of Ard and Heiser. So again, he's kind of like the original as far as the beer brand. And then in 1861, his daughter Lily married Adolphus Busch, and then Adolphus kind of became more prominent in the company. They renamed it Anheuser-Busch, and then after Anheuser died, well, Busch became the president, and now he rests here behind his son-in-law in a resting place that's a little bit more humble than his son-in-law's. This group of graves that we are looking at here is for the Bonville family, and one of them is a man by the name of Benjamin Bonville, and I think that's this one. I think it's kind of worn off and really hard to read, and I can see something up there that says USA. But anyway, Benjamin Bonville was in the U.S. Army. He was also a fur trapper and another explorer of the American West. So we've already visited the grave of William Clark. Here's another man kind of in that pantheon of American Western explorers. He's kind of noted for his expeditions west and for opening up parts of the Oregon Trail. He also, in one of his expeditions, sent a guy named Joe Walker to explore the Great Salt Lake and also to find an overland route to California. So it's thought that the path that they blazed became the primary trail known as the California Trail, which is where immigrants to the gold fields went during the California Gold Rush. But anyway, here's the grave of Benjamin Bonville. I was just walking back from Pope and Bonneville's grave, getting ready to get in the Jeep and go to the next spot, and happened to notice this grave right here to a Jesse Lindell, who died in 1858. And I thought, well, that's kind of an interesting looking marker. And then I looked behind it, and holy smokes, looks like there was a big old puff of wind came along and blew this monument over and did a little bit of damage. But I see some little orange flags here. I do want to say this doesn't reflect on the groundskeepers or the staff here at the cemetery. This is a very, very well-kept cemetery, and from everything that I've seen, they do an excellent job here. But yeah, that is really unfortunate. Got another interesting grave up here that we'll stop and make quick mention of. Now, at the beginning of the video, I mentioned that right next to this cemetery is Calvary Cemetery, and it's one of the places that I went in one of my early videos. I'll link it in the description. Calvary Cemetery is the final resting place of Dred Scott. So Dred Scott was a slave who lived in Missouri before he was sold to an Army officer. The Army officer was stationed in, I think, Illinois and Wisconsin, and Scott sued for his family's freedom in 1846 because he said that they were living, or had lived, where slavery was illegal. Well, the original owner of Dred Scott was this man right here, Peter Blow. So this court case ended up going all the way to the Supreme Court. Dred Scott ended up losing that case, which outraged the country and was one of the things that kind of further caused division, was pushing more towards, you know, the Civil War. Here's something that's really cool, though, is that Peter Blow's sons ended up purchasing Scott in 1857 and his wife and setting them free. So you have one generation who was the slave holders, and the next generation were the abolitionists. Yeah, but here's the grave of Peter Blow. All right, now here is a grave that I did not want to leave here without seeing first. This is the grave of James Eids. This guy was a civil engineer and an inventor, and this man was an absolute genius. Where he initially gained his fortune was when he was just 22 years old. He designed these salvage boats that could basically salvage wrecks from the Mississippi River. He also created a diving bell where, you know, people could go down and retrieve goods that were sunk in riverboat wrecks. And it was during this time, you know, on the Mississippi River that James Eids really kind of learns a lot of skills and learns a lot of things that's going to pay off later in life. When the Civil War breaks out in 1861, you may have heard of the ironclads. James Eids is the guy. He is the one who the U.S. government contracts to make these ironclads. After the Civil War, he constructs the very first steel bridge in the world that spans the Mississippi River. It still exists to this day and is being used by modern traffic. It's called the Eids Bridge. But yeah, it was the longest arch bridge in the world when it was completed. So you can look up more about that. There was kind of an urban legend at the time, because people were afraid to cross this thing. There was an urban legend at the time that an elephant wouldn't cross an unsafe structure. So when they opened the bridge, they brought an elephant out to cross. It's probably more for show than anything else. He also developed a method for opening up the Mississippi River to wider river traffic. There was problems with silt building up, and, you know, riverboats and ships would get hung up. So the U.S. government basically made a bet with him that he could solve the problem. They'd give him $8 million, and he solved it with a real simple system where basically constructed this jetty system that went out into the river, and then the natural flow of the river sped up and cut these channels to where riverboats and barges and river traffic could get through. But anyway, I love the story of James Eids. Very, very interesting guy. And here's his grave. We've moved over now to the grave of a pretty famous American political figure, that of Thomas Hart Benton. Now, we're looking at a monument to Benton. It might be that his grave is actually back here. So if it turns out that I'm wrong about this, I'll put a note in the description. I'm kind of flying blind here. But Benton, his nickname was Old Bullion, and he was the first senator, one of the first senators for the state of Missouri, and was the first senator to serve for 5 terms. Now we would call a senator who serves 5 terms a rookie. But anyway, he was originally born in North Carolina, served with Andrew Jackson in the War of 1812. He was one of his aides. And then after the war, settled in St. Louis. His big thing was westward expansion. He called for the annexation of Texas, which happened in 1845. Also pushed for basically taking hold of the Oregon Territory. He authorized the first Homestead Act, which granted land to settlers who were willing to farm it. So anyway, yeah, Benton is a pretty famous political figure in American history, and also kind of a complex figure as well. He owned slaves, but came to oppose the institution of slavery. So anyway, kind of an interesting guy. All right, well, let's take a look at another Civil War grave. So here's the grave of a Civil War soldier by the name of Henry OBrien. And if you see that blue flag there, well, that might give you a clue as to why we are stopping at this particular grave. Henry O'Brien was a part of the 1st Minnesota Volunteer Infantry and fought in the Battle of Ball's Bluff and at Malvern Hill and at Harper's Ferry. And if you know anything about Gettysburg, well, you know something else that he was a part of. On the 2nd day of the battle, the regiment made a desperate charge against Wilcox's Alabama Brigade and suffered devastating losses. So Henry O'Brien was one of the lucky men who survived from the 1st Minnesota on the 2nd day of the battle. And then on the 3rd day, well, he is going to perform an action that is going to lead to him being awarded the Medal of Honor. His citation says, taking up the colors where they had fallen, Corporal O'Brien rushed ahead of his regiment, close to the muzzles of the enemy's guns, and engaged in the desperate struggle in which the enemy was defeated, and though severely wounded, he held the colors until wounded a 2nd time. And the action that they are referring to there is what we now know as Pickett's Charge. But anyway, even though we're in St. Louis, Gary Edelman, all roads lead back to Gettysburg. But anyway, that's the grave of Henry O'Brien. All right, well, there you go. That was just a little bit from here at Bellefontaine Cemetery in St. Louis, Missouri. And there were several graves that I wanted to get to that I just simply didn't have time to go to. The gates close for this cemetery at 5 o'clock, and I just looked at my phone and it is 4:48. So I've got to get moving. But anyway, places like this, like I said earlier, this is where you can learn a lot of history. Here we have the history of the Civil War, of different politicians, of abolitionists, of slaveholders, of explorers. All right, these cemeteries are so rich in history, and it's worth your time to go to one that is nearby, even if they don't have any famous people, and learn a little bit more about your local area and about this country. All right, quick update. Well, I didn't make it in time. Oh, JD.